Stephen had just been digging up his garden when he stumbled upon an ancient wristwatch buried deep in the earth. Was there an old Rolex hidden beneath the thick layer of dried mud and dirt? Stephen hesitated. Should he toss the decaying, dirt-encrusted piece into the trash and forget about it? Or had he possibly struck gold and found a real treasure? The jeweler had been silently examining the watch for a few minutes now. Stephen could barely contain his nerves and excitement. He wished the jeweler would name a price and number that would tell him whether he had wasted his time or struck it rich. Stephen yearned to have some luck for once in his life. However, as he noticed the jeweler's expression, hope quickly faded away. The jeweler tried to stammer a response to Stephen but couldn't find the right words to begin. Stephen thought the jeweler probably couldn't bring himself to say that the watch was worthless. But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. On this afternoon, Stephen never expected to find anything as he dug up his garden. He anticipated pulling out stones and old roots from the soil, but not an ancient clock. The watch was a pure stroke of luck. Covered in thick dirt, it didn't look like a treasure at all, rather, it resembled a piece of trash or scrap. He was certain it wasn't his own, as he had never lost a watch before. Moreover, he and his wife had only been living here for a few years, and the watch looked as if it had been buried here for many years. Stephen's initial instinct was to rinse it under the faucet, hoping to uncover a mark or some other identifiable feature. But when he shared this idea with his wife, she immediately talked him out of it. She had never heard anything so foolish. Yet Stephen felt this watch was something special. He couldn't explain it, but he sensed it had a story to tell. Stephen and his wife discussed the matter and agreed that the risk was acceptable. They believed the watch could potentially serve as an added bonus for their retirement, and ideally, they could even gift a portion of the money to their beloved grandchildren. Stephen confirmed the appointment for the watch cleaning over the phone, hoping it would look good as new within 2 days. When he showed the timepiece to the watch cleaner, the expert seemed genuinely surprised, yet stating the watch was in terrible condition, and the cleaner had rarely seen one in such a deplorable state. To everyone's relief, it turned out that the watch was still in reasonably decent shape, although the dirt proved challenging to remove. However, not all parts of the watch were intact. Stephen had hoped that the watchmaker could estimate the value of the watch based on its brand or model. He secretly wished it might be a Rolex or something similar, but unfortunately, that wasn't the case. The cleaner couldn't find any brand markings on the watch and had never seen such a timepiece before. He even searched the internet but found nothing. Stephen was quite disappointed by the cleaner's findings, but suddenly disappointment turned into excitement. The cleaning process was finally complete, and the watch was no longer just a random discovery in the garden. After the costly cleaning, it had transformed into a real investment. But would this investment pay off? Stephen had a good feeling about it. Usually, a watch's value was determined by its brand. But could an old watch, unheard of by anyone, still be valuable? Stephen made a big mistake by having it cleaned. Fearful that his wife might be disappointed, Stephen decided to take the watch to the jeweler he had contacted over the phone. He was certain this jeweler was an expert in the field. The chances of the specialist recognizing the watch were much higher than with the cleaner. Perhaps Stephen could make a profit with this unusual timepiece. So far, he had already spent a whopping €250 just on the cleaning. When Stephen finally reached the shop, he was surprised to find it deserted. He was puzzled about the time and quickly took out his phone. While unlocking it, he noticed a missed call from his wife. Was she just checking in on the current situation, or did she know more? It's the jeweler calling Stephen. Panic sets in as Stephen wonders how the jeweler got his number. After taking a deep breath, he answers the call. The jeweler asks Stephen if he has been to his store. Stephen hesitates, wondering if he did something wrong or even damaged something. Why is the jeweler calling him? Stephen is worried that the jeweler knows about his visit. The jeweler asks many questions, wanting to know why Stephen was there, what he saw, and finally, why he took a photo of the framed picture. Feeling overwhelmed by all the questions, Stephen tries to brush off the jeweler. Why didn't he just talk about it in the store? Although Stephen tries to piece things together, it doesn't seem to click. So he decides to take a walk. Lost in thought, Stephen strolls along the sidewalk, pondering the watch. Suddenly, Stephen hears his name called by a familiar voice and turns around. The jeweler is standing on the sidewalk, politely asking for a conversation. That's not exactly what Stephen had hoped for. The jeweler assured Stephen that he had some interesting information about his watch and invited him to visit his shop around the corner. He reminded Stephen that he had already been there yesterday, and they had missed each other by just a few minutes as he had gone to grab a coffee. Stephen finally agreed, hoping to get some new insights. When Stephen handed over the watch to the jeweler for examination, the expert immediately began scrutinizing it. He compared it with the watch in the framed photo that Stephen had found in his garden. After a few minutes of concentration and silence, the jeweler looked at Stephen and said, "Considering the value of this watch, I'd like to offer you to keep it in my safe for the time being." Stephen decided to follow the jeweler's advice. trusting that he would likely sell the watch as well. However, he requested a receipt as proof. With the receipt safely in his pocket, Stephen hurried home and immediately sought out his wife. He sat down with her and recounted his conversation with the jeweler. Though his wife wanted to know the watch's value most of all, Stephen still couldn't answer that question. When Stephen's wife heard about everything, she became even more convinced of the watch's value. "Darling, doesn't the jeweler's behavior indicate that the watch is truly something special?" she asked cheerfully and confidently. Stephen couldn't disagree, but he was unsure about what to do next. He determined to keep a distance from the watch for now, but also ensuring he didn't forget what belonged to him. Stephen decided to call the jeweler. He and his wife created a list of demands to prepare for the call. However, when he heard who was on the other end of the line, he was surprised. It was evident that the caller was not the jeweler he had been dealing with. "Who are you?" asked Stephen, taken aback. At first, there was no response, but after repeating his question, Stephen finally got an answer. It turned out that the man on the phone was a member of a police SWAT team currently conducting a raid on the jeweler's shop. Stephen was in shock. He was completely bewildered and had no energy to demand an explanation. The SWAT officer had something more to say. He tersely explained that Stephen had to prove he had unearthed the watch in his garden. Stephen looked at the freshly planted salad bed and started to regret the watch. Stephen now realized he was too deeply entangled to find a way out. Besides, he knew it wouldn't be difficult to prove his ownership of the watch. After all, he had nothing to hide. He invited the SWAT team to his garden, where they could clearly see the traces of his digging. However, what Stephen didn't expect was that the officers would approach him immediately. Just a few minutes later, several cars parked in front of Stephen's house. Without hesitation, the SWAT team stormed into the garden, completely ignoring Stephen and his wife, who had come home by then. The officers carefully took mud samples from various spots in the garden, making sure no one else entered the area. Even Stephen had to watch the officers' activities from the kitchen window. Shortly after the SWAT team arrived, he noticed someone bringing a watch in a special container, ensuring it wouldn't be damaged. The stern faces of the officers made it clear that Stephen's future was at stake. In the meantime, two officers took Stephen and his wife aside and questioned them extensively. Most of the questions revolved around their house and garden. They were asked how long they had been living in this house and what changes they had made to their garden over the years. Stephen couldn't understand what all of this had to do with the watch. In front of the property, reporters and journalists gathered, held back by police tape, taking photos and videos of the SWAT teams and historians in the garden. Finally, Stephen saw someone with a familiar face, the jeweler. It took a while for the police to let him through, and he could enter the house. The jeweler was accompanied by a representative from the State Museum. The truth about the watch was finally revealed. It had once belonged to a dictator who passed away in this area many years ago, and they even disclosed that the dictator was wearing the watch at the time of his death. Stephen and his wife were delighted to hear that. After all the expenses, excitement, and hassle, they would still profit a little from their discovery. However, they didn't know the exact value of the watch yet. The museum representative happily revealed the price the museum was willing to pay, a whopping $35,000. Stephen and his wife embraced each other with radiant smiles, already planning a small vacation trip.